Welcome back to another episode of the Empower Grief Journey podcast. I'm your host, Chris Mamone, and I'm an acceptance coach who helps people heal from grief, loss, and trauma to discover their self acceptance and step into their personal power. This podcast is your dedicated space for healing, growth, and transformation. Each episode shares insightful and inspirational stories, along with practical tools and actionable insights that can help guide you along your healing journey. Today, I have a special guest with us that was at the grief conference I was in last month. Her name is Crystal Robinson, and she is a national board certified health and wellness coach, a shopper certified total well-being coach, and founder of Crystal Moon Holistic Healing. With over 30 years of experience as a corporate engineer leader, she now guides high achieving professionals and purpose driven individuals to create meaningful change in every area of their lives. Through a personalized blend of science and soul, she helps clients reconnect with themselves, improve their health, relationships, purpose, and fulfillment, all through mind, body, and spiritual alignment. She's here to share her approach to Wellness Simplified, a path to clarity, joy, and healing, bringing back to you. Crystal, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Chris. It's great to see you again.
Likewise, I had a great time connecting with you initially before the grief conference, and it was a real honor to be a part of the panel that you had at the conference. I have learned a lot of things talking to you, opening my mind up on a spiritual aspect and a mindful aspect of life, and I'm just very grateful to have you on the show today. And I wanted to give you an opportunity to tell our listeners a little bit more about yourself.
A little more about myself. Well, I was a vice president of engineering for many years. I spent over 30 years in the engineering field. And that led to a lot of stress, a lot of burnout, a lot of anxiety, and medical issues. And I think it was because I just wasn't where I was supposed to be. Even though I was really good at engineering and I climbed that corporate ladder as a mother, as a wife, as a career woman, I shoved everything else aside. I did for everybody and everything else instead of myself. And that led to a lot of illness. I never dealt with grief in all the different ways that it was happening to me. I never dealt with the traumas, and they all manifested in illness for me. I ended up allergic to numerous foods in my 30s and then having panic attacks over being scared of having more anaphylactic reactions. And that led to even more sickness with a lupus diagnosis that took years to figure out, and ultimately a brain tumor, and having to have a golf ball sized tumor removed from my brain. That woke me up, really literally just kind of slapped me and woke me up. And I knew I wasn't doing what I should have been doing. And during that whole process, I was constantly learning new ways to heal with nutrition, with movement, with mindset, with dealing with the traumas, with somatic processing, and really connecting with the spiritual part of it, mind, body, and spirit. After the brain tumor was removed, I realized I was a medium. All of a sudden, I started talking to dead people. And it wasn't because I was crazy. It was something that was there all along that just kind of became really, really sudden. And it happened right at the right time because when that happened, less than a year later, I lost my dad tragically in an unexpected accident. And this was after losing my stepmom of 30 years just a few years before. So I had a lot of grief going along, and the spiritual mediumship part of it really helped me take it to a next level with the healing.
I wanted to ask you about that because I'm always fascinated by mediums and how they pick up the energy of things. You said that kind of happened at the right time for you, but I've just been curious, how did you stumble across that gift? Did it just kind of appear to you, or was there a sign or some kind of energy that came to you through that process?
I noticed it happening because I was meditating more and more. I was getting into meditation for my healing journey, especially after the having the brain tumor and dealing with the lupus diagnosis. And every time I would really get in the stillness and the quiet, I things would show up. Pictures, I'd see pictures in my mind. I'd have people telling me things. And then my grandfather started showing up. And this was all like before my dad passed. I would have dreams that were things that were happening, that were going to happen. And then I realized I'd been having them kind of all my life, but just kind of suppressing them, not wanting people to think I was, woo woo. And I went on a couple of trips, and whenever I went on these trips and I was in a space of kind of relaxation and not in the hustle bustle of home, things would open up. My husband and I had gone to a nice little cabin after dropping my son off at college. And this little cabin was on this creek, and we spent like a weekend there just to kind of decompress. And this person kept coming to me at night, and I'd be lying in bed and I would wake up and I was seeing like these shadows, and I was like, who is this person? And at first I felt a little scared, but then I was like, no, no, it's fine. I'm fine. And then the person was telling me that they died like in the creek, and they were giving me numbers and names. I don't specifically remember what they are now because this was years ago, but I do remember the next morning contacting the owners and being like, does this make any sense to you? These names, these numbers. And it turned out that it was the previous owner before they bought it of the original buildings, because there was a house and a couple of cottages. And the year was the year he died. Like the number that I gave was the year he died. It was like all of these things like they were just like they were correct. Um, and so I was like, okay, I guess I'm not crazy. And she was like, this is really cool. And she was like all into it. And as we were like messaging back and forth through like the Airbnb app. And then it happened again when my husband and I went to Tennessee for his uncle's services. We had driven there and we stayed in this beautiful cabin, and I was having indigenous people come to me. There was like near an indigenous burial ground that was coming up for me, and I was like getting all of this stuff, and I was just like, okay, there's something going on here. And that's kind of how it opened up. Next thing you know, I'd be sitting in work and like working away, and like people would be talking to me, and it was like I was in a cage and everybody was trying to talk to me through the bars.
Oh
And
my
I
God.
finally got to the point where I have to find a medium. So I started like Googling mediums. I'm like, because I didn't really know anybody. And I just found one that like resonated. And of course, there's quite a few in the area. And I just kept looking at their websites and seeing, okay, I need to make an appointment and go see somebody. Um, and that's when I did. I went and saw somebody. And this was after my dad had passed, and he had come to me before he had even passed when he was in the hospital, and like then he was there with me, so all of this, and I was like, I really have to do something about it. And so I went and sat with the medium, and then I worked with her for weeks so that I could like figure out how to understand what was happening to me. And she was kind of like the little push that I needed to like just tap into it.
So now when you say that these spirits are talking to you, like there's like voices coming at you, do you have a way to and I don't know how to say it correctly, but like push them away or like quiet them down a little bit so you're able to be present in life, or is it just literally a download all the time when you're around that energy?
So for me, originally it was like all the time, and I couldn't deal with it. Like I would come home from work and like drink a glass of wine or two to like shut it off, because I was like, I'm going nuts. Like what's happening? Which is why I met with this other medium, and she taught me a few things, and then I learned how to start controlling my energy, how to like learn how kind of like a light switch, like turn it on and off and be like, all right, spirit, I'm off right now. This is a closed gateway. Like you can't come in. And now it's just innately part of me, but it did take some time for me to understand how to like really control my spiritual connection, and when I would allow that to be open and when I would shut it. So I automatically, when I go in a group environment, it's like shut, because otherwise I'm learning stuff about people that they probably don't want me to know.
That's what I was
And
wondering about that.
I would go into restaurants and be like, that person's husband's not very nice to her. They need to leave their job. I was like, all of these things would come in, and I couldn't even
Whoa.
enjoy like having dinner with my husband. So I was like, I go into any place like that now, and it's just like, shut it off. Like, this is my bubble. This is where I'm living.
I can't imagine how hard that would be to just be sitting there and like people you don't even know 20 feet away are like, all right, I know these details about you. Like, and I didn't ask for it or want it, but somehow it came this way. Like,
Yeah. But there's something interesting about that. And as I was doing this like healing process about like connecting my mind and body and really never being in the spiritual part of it, that spiritual element helped me learn so much about people.
mm.
Everybody's got stuff. We all have
Humble.
deep, heavy stuff that everybody's dealing with, and it's different for everyone. And it makes you look at everybody differently.
That's a very interesting perspective because I know that we oftentimes go through life. This is why I think grief is so misunderstood in the world and why a lot of people have that mindset of let go and get over it, move on kind of thing. But we all can't because we're not living everybody else's experiences of life. Our grief is very personal to us. And it's really a journey that, there is no 12-step program for that. There's no talking to somebody and saying, okay, here's the way to do this. I got it figured out. Like it doesn't work that way. And so, I love that you said that that opened up your mind in that area of saying like, wow, everybody's got heavy stuff going on. And I think that in a lot of ways, I wish that more of us had access to that in a minor scale of things to be more empathetic and understanding, to be aware of ourselves and what level of compassion, empathy that would bring to the world if we had that perspective.
Yeah, I really think that that's a big part of our own healing journey. We all think that we're the ones struggling and everybody's, out to get us, or, the blame and shame game. This person did this to me and that person did that to me. Like I had a session with a client today, and, that person is really deep in the hole of stuff, and it's all blame on all of these situations. And it's like, you need to take responsibility for you, because everybody's got this stuff. Some stuff is heavier than others, but everybody's got a pile of stuff, like that baggage that they're carrying around. And once you start realizing that unless you walk in their shoes, you have no idea. With social media, people seem to think they know everybody, but what you're seeing is what they want to portray.
I couldn't be in more of agreement with you on that because I do think in a lot of ways social media has become a place where we see what we perceive about people, but not what actually goes on. And I think there are some people out there like you and I that, we are the real deal. We just show it right on our shoulder, hard on the sleeve and say, this is the real me. This is exactly what you would get from me if I was in person. And I think because of all that fake influencing going on, we end up telling ourselves like in some way, shape, or form we're not good enough, or we don't have enough, or we're not doing the right thing, or we're not dealing with it in the way we should, because we're always comparing ourselves to other people. And I think that
Mm.
that's another avenue of grief that I'm trying to break in my own coaching practice is don't compare grief stories and grief journeys and healing journeys with everybody else because it's not going to be the same. It's not going to have the same meaning, the same purpose, the same forward momentum in your life. It's not going to be anything like that. Everybody's got individual roads. But I do think instead of comparing, I wish people would be in that place of observation and learning, because there are things we can take away from different people's stories and healing journeys to help us navigate and find our own.
Yeah, I always notice that it happens all the time with a lot of my clients, and even just having conversations with people, and I say, comparison is the thief of joy, happiness, and success.
You could
As
not
soon
be
as
more
you can
right.
get rid of that comparison, you can follow your path, which is going to be different from everybody else's.
Well, I think that's the thing that most people forget. There's 8 billion people walking around the planet right now. And for those of us listening to the podcast, by the way, there's 2 out of 8 billion sitting on the podcast talking right now. And if their world was filled with, 8 billion of me or 8 billion of Crystal, it might be a boring place. And we might not really have the variety and diversity and differentiation that we do across the world. And I think that's what makes a beautiful aspect of human experience is that we all have different journeys and paths to live. And back to your comment about comparison, even in grief, comparing ourselves and trying to conform our path into something else that isn't even ours deviates us off that path. And I think, like you said too, about your experiences being in engineering and having health issues come up and arising, those were all things trying to push you over to where you're supposed to be, and get you away from the thing you weren't supposed to be in.
Yeah, exactly. It really was the universe just pushing me, right? Some people would say it's God, some people would say it's spirit, whatever you want to call it. It was kind of my wake up call of, listening to myself instead of shutting myself down. That was a
So,
big part of my healing journey and my moving forward journey. And really actually just working through that, in a process. I have a new book coming out very soon, and about 45 days maybe. And I actually talk about this process in a couple of the chapters in the book about my realizations about what I was doing, why I was doing it, and what I was allowing, or what I was enduring
mm,
in that circumstance, and how I took my power back and just changed the scales and basically felt comfortable in where I was because I was on another path on the sidelines. I did lower the time that I was working. Instead of 5 days a week, I was 3 or 4 days a week. And on the sidelines, I was creating this business and getting my certifications and health and wellness and coaching and nutrition and all the things that I use to help myself, because I knew after what I went through that I didn't go through it just for me. I went through it because I'm meant to help others do the same.
That's really beautiful. I was sitting in my brain asking this question that I'm going to ask you now, which was, what were some of those key turning points in your grief journey? Because it sounds like you had a lot of very profound moments, especially after you got that brain tumor, going through that lupus diagnosis and figuring out what that was, and finding and discovering that you were a medium. Like you had a lot of big turning points in that healing journey. Describe that a little bit more, what that was like when you felt those moments of shift.
It's almost like it was stairs, like in the ladder. And it happened like one year after another after another. And if I look back now, I can see it. But when it's happening, you don't realize that you're making increments. You're going up the stairs. Even though when you get hit with something, it may feel like you're getting knocked down a few, or maybe even a flight, right? But like after each one happened, I would learn new things about myself in order to heal myself, in order to work through what was happening. And maybe I wasn't ready to deal with some of the stuff that was still deep rooted because I needed to do each stair and each part of that. And like when I got the lupus diagnosis, I sat in that for a while. I really like let myself become part of that victim mentality. And I noticed how much worse I got. Like I was living in the
Mm.
grief of the fact that I have this incurable disease and I am going to be on medication for my life and I will probably end up on, disability and not be able to do all these things. I was living there and living in the grief, really. And the grief of the life that I wanted to have that I didn't think I could have. But
Interesting.
I actually did the mindset change. And it happened at some point that this isn't really the life I want. I need to change. I need to change what I'm doing. And one step at a time, I did. And I described some of it in my book, some of my tools that I used. I by the time I got hit with the brain tumor, I had healed lupus. I was on no medications. I was able to go out in the sun again and not get the skin rash. I wasn't on disability. I was dancing again. I was doing all these things that I was doing before the diagnosis and when I was dealing with getting diagnosed. And then the brain tumor hit, and it was, I ended up in that hole for like an hour. And after that, I was like, nope, we're not going there. I'm going to get on the computer. I'm going to start researching. I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to talk to all my family and friends. This is what's going on. This is how we're approaching it. Da 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 da. And that mindset, I think, is what made me come out of it with basically nothing. I could have not been able to walk. I could have not been able to talk. I had 27 staples in my head. This thing was the size of a golf ball right here. Like I went through that surgery within 2 weeks of them finding it because they were like, it's so big, it's causing micro seizures and you need to be on seizure medication and all these things. And I could have been in that grief of, oh my goodness. But the previous thing taught me that if I stayed there, I would just get worse. What you believe, you will achieve. So if you believe that you are the diagnosis, then that's what you will be. So believing that I could overcome this was like the first step in me doing it and coming through it on the other side.
You shared a really powerful thing about grief that I tell a lot of people that I coach is that grief is all about small steps every day, not looking at this big gigantic step. I was on Facebook today in my groups where I interact all the time, and somebody said, how can I get rid of trauma and how can I get rid of just how this feels? And it was just like wanting quick fix of something. And And I shared, there is no quick fix to grief. Funny story, there's not. There's very small steps you can take every day, to, like you said, taking those steps up as you go. And sometimes it feels like you fall back a flight and then keep climbing. But that's the nature of grief. You can't really get rid of it, but you can ultimately work towards getting that place where it's minimized in your life and doesn't impact you as harshly. And I think that that takes a lot of work and takes a lot of mindset, like you talked about. A lot of people can fall into that trap, and I fell into it too, where you're in that victim place of saying, this happened to me, and I can't understand why this is, and oh my God, I'm scared of this outcome, and this is going to be my life now on. And those things happen to all of us. That's a very natural response to things. But we also have the same power and ability to decide otherwise, like you did, and say, I'm going to beat this. I can do this. And what's it going to take for me every day to do that? And I think that changing that mind state from victim mentality over to, the hero mentality, I like to call it, is really, having a shift of things happening to me versus things happening for me.
Mm.
What's your thought about that?
I say that all the time. Things happened for me, not to me. I'll have these conversations like on podcasts or even with people and oh, I'm so sorry you had to deal with those illnesses, or I'm so sorry. I'm like, I'm not. I'm a completely different person than I was 10 years ago. And I don't know if I still want to be that person that I was 10 years ago. I think I like this me, the growth me, right? And every day we become a different person. And it's based on our experiences. And I think when you look at it that way, it does change. And sometimes you have to look back and be like, oh, yeah, it really was for me. Because when you're going through it, nobody wants to be there. But I think once you can actually see past it, you can start looking at things in your past differently. Really, like every trauma in your life, you can look at differently. You can say, okay, I had no control. There's a yogi that I had worked with. He used to say, I'd heard him say it a couple times, and it might be a quote that's by somebody else, but that you may not be responsible for the wounds, but you are responsible for the healing.
Hmm. That's a very powerful quote. And I think that, when you're going through the throes of grief, especially if you've had trauma or any kind of verbal, emotional abuse in a relationship with somebody, whether that's at work or family or whoever, it's very, very hard to see that in the moment, because you're seeing how things were happening to you. But as you said, we do have the control to heal. We do have that option and that choice, that decision we can make. And oftentimes it's not easy, because we are sitting there saying, why did this have to happen to me? Or how did this even happen in this first place? And a lot of times we're very quick to blame our outside circumstances when we go through grief. We're very quick to point outwards instead of in.
Hmm.
And the inward path is a very, very hard one. I had a conversation with a client last night about that too. And I said, it's very, very hard to blame yourself. We're really good at doing it to everybody else, but it's very hard to come in and say, blame myself for, what was my contribution to things, or what was my role in this, or my decision I made that led me here. I think that's a very hard thing to do in grief, but when you do it and you face that pain, you actually give yourself more choice and more control, more decisions over your healing journey and how you want to go forward from this grief path that you've been on. And I think that's where that mindset shift happens that you were talking about, is when you take your power back, take your control back, all of a sudden you've got an empowerment inside you to help move you forward on that next phase of life. And like you said too, and I'll wrap up with this, but you're never going to be the same person you were at 20 as you are at 30 or 40 or even 50 or 60. You're never going to be the same person because you have
Yeah.
so many experiences of life. But the whole point is to learn from those things as you go forward in life. And it's never about being perfect or having it all figured out or knowing exactly what's going to happen next, but it's really just about being the best version of yourself that you can be in the moment.
Yeah. The way that I often tell it to my clients is it's your responsibility to look at what you've learned in that past and what your part in it was,
Mm.
no matter what. And I use this as an example for a lot of people that have gone through trauma. Once you really kind of process what happened and that it shouldn't have happened to you, It's not giving anybody permission that that trauma should have happened. Whether in my case it was rape as a teenager. I had dealt with a lot of sexual harassment in a male dominated business. I had a lot of that stuff and I blamed them, right? And yes, it was their fault, but it was a way of like grabbing onto it, right? That I could just blame, 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 as opposed to taking responsibility for my own healing and realizing the more I held on to that, the more I was deteriorating my own spirit.
That's really powerful perspective because grief, I've always shared that grief has the power to create and destroy, and it can go both ways depending on what choice you want to make in your life. And I couldn't agree more with you that, it is our responsibility to choose healing, but it's also our responsibility to look at what role and decision we played in that situation because that can be very empowering, by the way. When you do go forward in your healing journey, that if you were to experience something similar like that again, knowing that you made the choice not to do certain things to put yourself back in that situation again, it makes you feel a sense of control and makes you know that you're not going to go through that again because you won't allow yourself to. It's not even about other people at that point, but you're not going to allow yourself the opportunity to get back in that.
That's
Yeah,
exactly what it is. It's empowering, right? It's realizing that maybe this happened to me to teach me what I need to know to move forward in my life, you know? We all have a lot of stuff that happens to us. We all have stories.
I
Whatever
think
you
that's
can
what
learn and grow from is the best.
Well, that's what, I've learned along my spiritual journey that a lesson will always get repeated until you learn it. And I know that
Hmm.
sounds really basic, and some people are going to be like, "Well, can't you just learn it the first time?" And I'll go, 99% of us don't get it the first time. That's the reality of that.
Really
But we
is.
have some of us can learn it 3 times in, others 10 or 20. Some people take longer, and guess what? That's okay. It doesn't mean you're wrong or something's issue with you. It just means that that lesson will continue to present itself until you learn how to deal with it. And sometimes it takes something really bad in our life to shape us. And in the grief world, that can be losing a parent, it could be losing a child, it could be losing a spouse, it could be losing a job, a relationship, losing yourself even. It can take those situations to just shift your course over where you're supposed to be. And in the moment, when those things happen, we all of a sudden we're just going, what the hell? Like, where's my life going at this point? And why did this happen to me? But then we look back 10 years or 5 years later and we go, oh, that's why that happened. Got it. Like,
Yeah.
I understand
This
now.
there's this funny story, or it's like a proverb or whatever. I know it comes from like some ancient teachings. I don't know the exact author of it, where he talks about this deity statue that this person comes and prays to every day. And he's, I need money, I need money, I want to win the lottery, or whatever it is he's asking for. He's asking over and over. It comes every day, months on end, months on end. And one day the statue wakes up and like whacks him and says, play the lottery. It's like, I can't make it happen for you if you're not trying. Otherwise, all you're doing is sitting here asking. But you have to start doing to go forward. You can't just wish for it. You actually have to take strides to get it. So just wishing for money or wishing to win the lottery isn't going to work. You actually have to play. So it's kind of a funny story if you think about, oh, I keep wishing for these things, but I'm never actually moving towards it with anything I do. And your intentions will create your reality.
I think that's a powerful part that I learned on my spiritual journey, and it's kind of funny. The more crude thing I heard in my life was nobody's coming to save you, so you just got to figure it out. And that's a rough way to say things, but I've learned on this journey I've been on, spirit leaves messages for you all the time. And it's only in those times, like you hinted at earlier, that when you quiet your mind down, when you're in a peaceful place, you're not distracted 24/7, when you quiet the mind down, those messages come at you, and they do come at you pretty hard sometimes. And when those messages come through, though, they shift you and point you in the right direction. So as long as you're taking action, like you just brought up, and this is not, by the way, meaning that you got to go take huge, massive action like a lot of people say, but noticing those shifts and those messages when they come and taking that one step, that's it, not 20 steps, one step, and focusing there. Spirit can guide you on those paths, and you will get the results you get if you have the right intention behind yourself.
Exactly. I couldn't agree more. It really all has to do with what your intentions are and where you're taking your thoughts. If you decide to take your thoughts into that victim mentality or into, the space of, whatever it is that you don't want to be, then that's where you will be. As soon as you start taking your thoughts another way, your actions immediately will start following.
And that's where all the growth happens, is right in that area.
Yep.
And that's why I've always told people, grief is a personal transformation journey. It's not meant to be pain and suffering. It's not meant for that. It's meant to shift your course. And I've talked to so many people on this podcast as guests that have had lost their parents for whatever reason, lost a child, they've lost jobs. I've seen grief in such an array of different areas of things, but I've watched these people go through huge transformations in their life. And you're a prime example of that, going from a VP to engineering company. I mean, that's a really something to be proud of, by the way, in a very hard field. And it would be seen very accomplishment wise out in the normal realm of things. And then to switch into this alignment path that's completely opposite, but you're out there doing beautiful work with people on a deeper level of purpose. What was that transition like for you?
It was really pushed on me by spirit, like in my body. It was that whole mind body spirit connection. It was like the more I kept going forward in pushing through and trying to prove myself over and over, even though I already had, I climbed this ladder. I did engineering from the time I was 16 years old. I had started in a drafting program and worked on a co-op program in high school, and then, got a job and went from there and worked my way up. I was a vice president for 17 years with this company. Um, and I ran multiple departments as well as the engineering group. I did all of that without a college degree. I really worked
Wow.
my butt off. And it was all because I was just trying to prove myself. And it wasn't until I really started connecting with myself that I knew that I had nothing to prove, that I could
Mm.
do what made my heart soar, not just what made me money.
I love what you just said there, because I think a lot of us get caught in that trap of trying to prove ourselves to other people. And I usually relate that to I have this method about push and pull in life, and I've learned that when we're always trying to push in a sense of proving ourselves or trying to climb a ladder that we don't necessarily belong on, that fight is really, really hard. There's a lot of resistance. There's a lot of pain that comes attached to it. And like you said about our mind and our body, I do believe that when we're out of alignment and we're in that place of pushing, that's when all these things start happening health wise. Our mindset changes. Our life doesn't always have a level of peace to it. There's a lot of challenges, a lot of left turns and bad curveballs that get tossed to us. And if we stay on that path all the time and we're constantly fighting, eventually we're going to get tired at one point or another, whether that's our health deteriorates, our mindset deteriorates, or we lose that job or whatever it may be. Eventually, something like that's going to happen. It's going to shift us anyways. And so I've learned that when we instead allow things to come towards us without us pushing, what's meant for us is always going to come to us. And it doesn't have to go by force or proving ourselves or any of those things. We can just allow these things to gravitate naturally to us. And that's what it sounds like happened on your story.
Yeah, it was just one thing after another, and it just evolved. It kept evolving. But I think it was supposed to be there from the beginning. Yeah, when I originally went into the whole drafting program, it wasn't what I wanted to do. I wanted to go into cosmetology. I wanted to like cut hair and do makeup and do some of those girly things. Even though I grew up with my dad making go-karts and playing in the garage, I was the tomboy who was good at math and science, and my father wouldn't let me go into cosmetology. I wasn't allowed.
Mm.
I had to pick either electronics or drafting. So I felt like I was kind of forced into that. Um, but I did kind of, when I got out of high school and I was working in engineering by day, I went to night school by night and got my cosmetology license and then did that nights and weekends for years until my son was born. My second
Hmm.
child was born, and then I stopped doing that second job. Um, and I knew that I loved doing that because that was a service job. Whereas I felt like even though the engineering, what I was designing and we were making was eventually serving people, I didn't feel like I was serving anybody but the owner of the company.
I can see how that would be because you're just making the products and designing things and testing and doing a lot of those things, but you don't necessarily get to enjoy the end result of things or see how people respond to that end product. And I can see how being in cosmetology, I can see service related wise, you're getting to talk to people face to face every day. You're getting to, I don't know if you did cutting hair, lashes, makeup, whatever it may be in that industry, nails.
Nails. I did
Um,
nails. That's what I did. And I still do my own and my daughter's, but I did it for years and I just loved it. And I loved just meeting with people, sitting and talking with people. And now as a coach, that's what I do. I listen to people's stories, I give them the tools they need, and I help them heal.
What's one of the most common things since you're in the coaching space like I am? What's one of the biggest challenges you see people go through when they're dealing with grief up and firsthand?
It's definitely looking for the quick fix is the biggest challenge, I think. You know, they're looking for the light switch that they can just turn on or off, as opposed to actually just putting their shoulders down and being like, okay, I'm safe, I'm okay. I can do this. It's more of the fear if they let it go. The fear of letting go of the grief,
Like,
of the bad part of the grief, right? It's always going to pop up here and there. But I think when it does pop up later, you know, sometimes you smile because it's a memory of what happened or what that person was like or what you did with that person. And it's not the same type of grief that huddles you in a corner on the floor, right? And it just takes a while for you to get there. You know, they always say time heals grief, but it's not necessarily time. It really is different for everybody. Some people can do it really quickly. Some people it takes a long time. It's all those thoughts that you have. It's the thoughts, the emotions, the feelings, and whether or not you're allowing your body and your mind to process them, or you're just afraid to. So you're just constantly shoving it away.
I think that's something that a lot of people get shy with in the grief process is they don't feel it's okay to not be okay in the process. I think that's something I see a lot happen. And that's a lot of times because of influence of things. You know, like you said, your dad gave you a choice of, you know, electronics or drafting. And I think a lot of people feel that way in grief too because of people around them. They feel like I either have to be all in okay and I'm fine, I can move forward, or I'm a wreck and there's a problem with me. But they don't always see the middle road of you can be okay and not okay at the same time, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with you.
Yeah, it's funny because I tell people like I do remember, you know, when my dad passed, it was a big deal. And there was a lot of people that were very upset over it. And I was too, but I held it all in. I suppressed it all
Mm.
so that I could be there for everybody else and handle all of the stuff. Because I was an only child, I had to handle the estate, handle, you know, what was going on with the other people in the family and handle, you know, his burial and all of those things. And at one point I do remember thinking, are people going to think that I didn't love him because I'm not a mess?
Mm.
Because I'd be a mess behind the scenes and not in front of others. And I think it was more because I had to have control, you know? And I think a lot of people do that. They have control, they keep themselves busy with what they need to do in order to get through. And then when everything calms down and it's quiet is when you can actually grieve. And I would actually really, really grieve in those times. And I think some people just don't allow themselves to actually do that. They start crying and they're like, no, 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 stop, stop, stop. But like to actually just get all blubbery and just do it as much as you need to, sometimes that's what has to happen. We cry for a reason.
I couldn't agree more with you about that because that's what I witnessed with a lot of my family when people have passed is it's always this tough face put on. Don't show people outwardly what's going on. And but I think that you know when we do that, we harbor grief and trauma inside ourselves. And that's where I start thinking that that grief and trauma is like a little ping pong ball bouncing around the body, and that's when it starts getting really destructive, is when you don't give it space to come out. And a lot of people I've seen, hold grief in for 10, 20 years is what I've seen. And the damage that does to somebody is insurmountable. And I've learned that a lot of times through this process that grief isn't always external. It can be very internal. And when we don't actually give it space to move or process through it, it will represent, our mental pain will represent as physical pain. Sometimes that can be, muscle spasms. Sometimes that can be anxiety. Sometimes that can be tumors. That can be a myriad of health problems that can come out of that. And it's really
Autoimmune.
autoimmune.
Autoimmune. It's all of those things. And I think that it's really important that people understand that processing emotions, grief, sadness, even joy, all of the emotions you need to process, if you're not processing them and you're just shoving them, even if you're doing it behind the scenes, it's fine to do it behind the scenes as long as you're processing it. It will come out in everyday life situations. You get snappy at people because they said something. You get snappy at the person at the store because they're acting differently. And it comes out in how you react. I like to call it the windsock guy, the like at the sales at the like the car dealerships, the like the
Oh
windsock thing with the
yeah.
arms. You get a whoa and and it comes out in your reactions because these are suppressed emotions that your mind doesn't want to deal with because it doesn't feel safe. So they get pushed into the body, and then your body's like, oh, this doesn't feel good. Okay, suppress it some more. And then something pops up and it's like, ah! And your reactions are just out of nowhere. And people look at you like, well, what's going on with them? But that's what's going on. It's a not processing your grief, your sadness, whatever it is that you've lost, whether it be a life, a loved one, a job, a relationship.
It can be in a lot of different areas of life, and that's what I think, it's important for us to hold space for ourselves when we do go through those moments. And
Mm.
I always encourage people, not to run from those moments of fear when they happen, but just stand there with them. And one of the big things I've learned too is that our emotions are messengers. That's a big thing I've learned out of grief is emotions aren't meant to be controlled. They're not meant to be suppressed. They're not meant to be hidden or tucked away. Those are emotions are meant to come to the surface. And something that I'm trying to help men learn is that there's more than anger and silence in emotion land. I hate to tell all men that, but there's a lot more in between there. Um, I was talking to a guest a while ago, and we got on the topic of women being overly emotional, and I said they're not overly emotional. They know how to be emotional. They know how to read emotion. They know how to understand it. I said that's what's misunderstood with that statement. I said then there's men over here that we have anger and quiet and suck it up. That's what we've got going on. And I said, but sadly, what's in between those things is just tucked away and hidden because we were told not to feel those things. We were told not to show those things or be those things. And so
And you
we
know
don't
what?
we
That totally resonates with me. And I'm going to tell you why. So I grew up with my dad. My mom left when I was young, and I got to see her on weekends here and there. But like I lived with my dad from the time I was 10 years old. And so, and then I went into a male dominated field. And if I ever showed any emotions of any type, I was soft or I was a bitch or, any of those types of things that I wasn't like either anger or quiet.
mm,
So now
that
I
makes
can see
sense.
like I can relate to that because I know what that did to me over the years and how I had to start realizing, oh no, it's okay to show your emotions. It's okay to ask questions and be like, why am I feeling this way? Why do I feel this in my stomach? Why do I feel this why are my shoulders and my ears all of a sudden? Why am I like, oh? And like once you start actually being aware of those reactions in your body and what your thoughts are contributing to that, you can actually start sitting back and being quiet and processing it, and being like, oh, this is interesting. Wonder where this comes from.
Yeah, because that's the thing about our bodies and our minds that, we live in such a reactive society nowadays that people miss this all the time. But your body is the biggest indicator of what the hell's going on, what feels safe, what's not. You're just not listening to it when it happens. And Our body, by the way, if you're ever in that place where somebody doesn't want you to show emotion, you'll start feeling it right here. You'll start feeling it up top. Those feelings you have before any thoughts or words come flying out, that's your body saying, hey, something's a warning sign right now. This is not a safe place to be, or you're not safe enough to express yourself, or this person won't allow you to have an emotion. Your body is doing that work for you before you even get there. So giving yourself that space to quiet your mind down and pay attention to your body can really help you regulate those situations really well.
Mm.
And that can also help you too, by the way, in grief, because I know that getting triggered in grief is a big hard one for a lot of people because, and it's hard for me too. I deal with that all the time. But
Mm.
our triggers, by the way, are our biggest teachers, but they're also emotions there that are warning us of something. And if we pay attention to our triggers instead of reacting to them, we give ourselves the opportunity to heal further in our grief process because we're going to understand those warning signs a lot faster. And instead of reacting to things from the trigger, we can respond differently. And that response is where we've got control.
Yeah, we become the flower in the garden instead of the windsock guy.
Exactly. I mean, when sock
We're
guy
like,
is cool at the
oh,
car
oh, I
dealership.
got this. You know, that's exactly what I was trying to express. You said it very eloquently. It's it's the awareness of your body and your mind, and that sometimes your mind tells you things to keep you just safe, even though you're not in danger.
Yeah, well,
Realizing that you're actually safe and that it's okay to move through the feelings in the body.
that's
And
why I try
somatic
to
processing can help so much in that, specifically in grief. Actually, like closing your eyes, feeling the emotion, feeling where it is in your body, and staying with it for 90 seconds. That's how long it takes your body to process that feeling. 90 seconds. It's way longer than most people think because most people start to feel that lump in the throat or that knot in your stomach, and like 10 seconds can go by and you're like, nope, 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 nope. Don't want to feel it. Right? But if you were to like, okay, I can feel this lump. I'm going to close my eyes. I'm going to set a timer, 90 seconds. You will be amazed how much you feel that transition and change in your body. And when you actually do that, you're retraining your nervous system to understand that you weren't in a life or death situation, that your nervous system can re regulate based on the thought or the emotion.
I love what you just said there because you're absolutely right about that. Sometimes we feel that thing come up in our throat and we're like, nope, 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 we're always trying to fight it instead of just giving it room to breathe. And
Yeah.
you're right. I think that when we trying to get my words together with this, but our nervous system, when we go through grief or loss or trauma, can get very, very heightened and very, very sensitive to things. And it can be the slightest little thing that shoots it into overdrive. And that's where it's not necessarily a threat. It's not necessarily unsafe. It's just something trying to communicate with you. And instead of trying to like suppress that thing, as you said, just hold the space for it and just try to feel that thing out for 90 seconds. I think there's a lot of power in that because you'll actually understand the emotion, let alone where it came from. And you might also be able to understand what thought or experience came into your mind at that point that triggered that thing to happen, or what externally triggered that to happen. And
Yeah.
I
The
think that's a
process
big,
of that, the somatic processing, it's super powerful because as you feel the emotion change in your body, as you feel the feelings change in your body, the actual emotion changes. You could start with anger, but you really end up in sadness. It's an interesting swift switch that you see happen. Like it's a slow morphing. 90 seconds is slow when you're actually got your eyes closed and are trying to like deal with it. But it teaches your body how to go forward. So many of us today live in fight, flight, or freeze based on whatever has happened to us. Never mind the fact of the busy world and everything's moving at a constant, very hectic pace. We all have traumas in our bodies from our childhood, from our teenage years, from our young years, whatever they are, and they manifest as that. We become in fight or flight or freeze. And when you start recognizing that, the saber-toothed tiger is not running at you right now, and you are okay, it completely changes your life. It can completely change how your body reacts, how your mind reacts, and how you speak and how you interact with others.
I couldn't agree more with you on that because I try to remind people this thing up here is 2 million years old. It's not designed to make you happy or keep you happy. It's designed to make sure you're safe. And so
Yes.
any perceived threat that this thing gets, it's just poof, it says possible threat like on radar. And you've got to be that you got to find that within yourself to say, no, I'm not threatened right now. I'm safe. I'm perfectly fine. I've talk to people in grief that have anxiety, and I said, when you have an anxiety attack, look around your room, look what's around you, and literally focus on those things. I look around. I've got prayer flags above my laptop. I've got a money tree beside me. I've got my iPad or whatever. I pick objects in my room and I say, I'm safe. There's no threat. You're fine. Nothing's coming to get you. You're okay. Like you have to talk yourself out of that. And contrary to what a lot of people think, I will say that for most people, I don't think meds for anxiety really work. I think it's really giving yourself space to understand yourself, understanding how your body works, how your mind works, how you process things. A lot of somatic healings, like you brought up today, sitting with emotion for 90 seconds, powerful. Those things will
Mm.
do more than a drug will do for you. Because when you can actually understand your body and get this thing in your body working and together, those things are very short-lived. I won't say you'll get rid of anxiety completely because that's the body's warning sign that there's a perceived threat or something going on, but you'll understand it. You'll have a way to say, I know why this got triggered, or I know what caused this to be triggered. And once you recognize those things, that's what I think is important about what you shared today. When we hold space for our emotions, when we allow ourselves to process it, all of that pressure comes down because we're letting the body and mind talk and get in sync. And that's the place that we can regain control.
I have an example regarding that anxiety. When I was
Mm.
dealing with the anaphylactic shock reactions to things I was eating that I'd eaten all my life, and now all of a sudden I'm deathly allergic to them, I had massive medical PTSD because I was constantly afraid. Like I wasn't eating in restaurants. I was I wasn't eating very many foods because I was just constantly afraid. I got to a point where I think I was in the hospital by ambulance 6 or 7 times within like a less than a year's time. And that last time that I remember in that stint, I ended up in the hospital for like 4 days, 5 days, because between the EpiPen and them giving you medication, my heart was like all over the place. And the particular doctor right there didn't know what was going on. So then they giving me medication to bring my heart rate down after the Epi's making it go up. It was like all these things. So then they thought there was something wrong with my heart. So then I'm going through all these heart tests. When I came out of that, I had so much anxiety and so much panic attacks. I was afraid to breathe. I would have a panic attack out of nothing, afraid that I was going to leave my kids without a mother, that I was going to just die if I drank something or ate something. I actually did take an anti-anxiety medication. And it was because I literally felt like I was in that nervous breakdown. Like I was like afraid of
Mhm.
everything. And over a short period of time, when I was able to start like figuring things out, is when I had connected with a holistic nutritionist, connected with him, and he helped me learn about what my body wanted, what it didn't want, and how to go through that nutrition process and what to eat and what not to eat, and starting to trust those things again. I was able to realize that I just felt numb on that medication. That's what it was doing. It was
Mm.
shutting off the feelings that I really needed to train, that I really needed to learn that where I was safe and where I wasn't safe. But based on the medical trauma, I just wasn't safe, and no matter what happened, because I had eaten something that I was pretty sure was safe, and it wasn't. And so then all the rules were like thrown out the door. So it really took a process for me to go through that. And what I would say to people is, if you need it at a point like that, then take it. But no, it's not something you should stay on. No, it's something you can taper down, and you can start learning how to train your nervous system, how to realize when you're safe and when you're not, what tools to use. I had all kinds of tools that I had to learn and use in the early stages just so that I wouldn't end up in a panic attack or back in the hospital. It it is a process. And how much I don't like medications because I'm not on any right now. I take some supplements and that's it. Um, I know for some people you need it in certain points of your life.
That's fair to say, and I appreciate you sharing that perspective because I see a lot of people and groups on Facebook on a lot of medication for that, and I feel really bad for them because of exactly what you just said, is that that stuff numbs you to a certain point, but you're also not being taught or made aware of that those are emotions you got to learn to work with and learn how to control because you can do it, and it takes a lot of work, by the way, it's not easy, but you have the ability to learn that side, as Crystal just said, and you can taper off those things, let alone get off them, because you're giving yourself that space to better understand yourself. I really appreciate you sharing that, Crystal, that personal experience with that, because I think that's what a lot of people need to hear out there is stories like that of how to taper off of that and what's really behind that and what that was actually doing for you. I think
Mm.
that's always left out.
Yeah, and really noticing when you do feel the numbness. Maybe you feel better because you're not in the anxiety, but at some point you will realize that you're not living. You're just kind of going along like a ghost. You're not really enjoying stuff either because it changes the way your body processes emotions, which isn't just the anxiety, it's also the joy.
That is well said. I couldn't agree more with you about that. Well, as we wrap up today's episode, I first off just want to say thank you so much for being on the podcast today and sharing your story about your own grief journey because as I've said before, grief is such a personal journey for everybody. And I think that hearing other people's stories of grief and how they've navigated that can help other people discover their own path of healing. So I wanted to thank you a lot for being on the show today. I usually ask my guests a couple questions at the end of things. If you were to run into somebody who's going through grief right now, or maybe feels stuck in grief, what's one thing you would share with them that could help them move forward just a little bit easier?
Take the time for you. Come back into yourself. Take a few minutes to breathe and find something that you love, something for you, whether that's reading, journaling, walking, gardening. You need to come back to yourself. You can't live in the grief. You need to live in this body.
I love that. That's powerful advice. I wish more people would learn that to instead of seeking externally with that, like you said, go within. What's that thing that makes you happy, brings you peace, brings you calm? I think those are very powerful things to do when you are going through the throes of grief to help you move forward in that process. Uh,
Mm.
I wanted to give you some time at the end today too. I know you shared you're writing a new book that's coming out. Could you tell us a little bit more about that book and then also where we can find you?
So the book is coming out in, like I said, like 45 days or so. It's called Mission Me 2.0, The Science and Soul of Coming Back to You. And it's all about my personal stories and all these different things in my life. Maybe some of the ones you've heard, but a lot of ones that you haven't, where I take that story and I relate it to the science and the mind body spirit connection of why it happens, how you can move through it. And then I also give you tools and action steps and how you can do that for yourself. So the whole book is like a one big learning workbook for you to come back to yourself. So that'll be available and it'll be out on my website and on my social media very, very soon. My social media is Crystal Moon Holistic Healing on Facebook, Instagram, and I'm on LinkedIn under Crystal Robinson. And you'll find my website is www.crystalmoonholistichealing.com. I offer one-on-one coaching. I have a group program that will be launching again in September. And I also do single sessions of balanced mediumship and tarot and intuitive healing.
Well, Crystal, I appreciate you being on the show today and sharing that with our guests. For everybody listening, by the way, on this podcast, if you go in the show notes on Podbean, Apple, or Spotify, I will have Crystal's website links and social media links for you guys so you can get connected with her. Crystal, thanks again so much for being a guest today.
Thank you so much, Chris. I really appreciate it.
And I want to thank all of our listeners for joining Crystal and I today on this episode of the Empower Grief Journey podcast. If this episode resonated with you, please share it with somebody you know who could benefit from Crystal's story. For more episodes that are designed to empower you and support you during your grief journey, visit empowergriefjourney.com and subscribe to this podcast. You can find us on Apple and Spotify. The Empower Grief Journey is all about honoring your journey, embracing your emotions, and finding strength in your own time. You're never alone on this journey, and together we can navigate grief with courage and compassion. Until next time, be kind to yourself and take your grief journey one step at a time.